So welcome to Language, Animals and Us. Many think language makes us uniquely human, yet bees communicate precisely how to reach a source of pollen from the hive, birds warn of a predator, dogs call to each other with their barks and understand our verbal commands, and new studies show that baboons' grunts align with human speech patterns, and even plants send signals to each other through their roots. Is human language just one type of communication, and have we wildly overestimated its importance? Are humans no different in principle from other animals and plants? Or is language profoundly different from all other forms of communication and the enabler of consciousness itself? With me to debate this fundamental topic, we have a great panel, all of whom have shown rather exceptional linguistic skills themselves. Jo Kavenna is an award-winning and acclaimed novelist whose books address big social and philosophical themes. And amongst her novels, Inglorious, A Field Guide to Reality, and her latest book, Zed. Ray Tallis had an impressive career in medicine and neuroscience before he turned to philosophical writing. His books address what is special about being human, central, of course, to today's debate, and include Aping Mankind and The Knowing Animal. And Jennifer Ackerman is a best-selling author who's written about science and nature for 30 years. Her acclaimed book, The Genius of Birds, was picked as one of their top books of the year by the Wall Street Journal, The Spectator, and the Sunday Times, and published in 20 languages. Her most recent book, Birdway, continues the exploration of the complexity and sophistication of avian life. I'm going to give each of the panel just 3 minutes to address the question: is human language special or just one of many forms of communication? So let's begin, first of all, with you, Jo.
Thanks, Hilary. So as you know, the question is immensely paradoxical. We're trying to talk about a system within the system itself, so we can't really get an objective view of it. Language, human language, is completely intrinsic to us. We're inducted into it from birth, and it's sort of something that's preceded us by centuries, even millennia, but then it becomes fundamental to our sense of self, and our consciousness co-evolves with our acquisition of language. And so in this debate, we're attempting both to define human language and compare it, which is wonderfully complex and paradoxical. And I think for lots of writers, this question of language isn't really special. It's very complex and baroque. And if you're James Joyce, you find it horrendous, really. He said writing in English was the most ingenious torture ever devised for sins committed in previous lives. And he felt very bound by these historical associations of language. Borges said that language is a system of signs which presupposes a shared past. And if you're resistant to that past, that can be very much a struggle to try to find your way in that. Caliban in Shakespeare, of course, sounds the quintessential complaint. He says, "The Red Plague rid you for learning me your language, for colonizing me." So there are all these echoes, and writing is a kind of fossilized poetry. Language, is a fossilized poetry. And that phrase is from Owen Barfield. And what I mean by that is there are so many echoes and associations, so many ambiguities. Even in this question we have, just really quickly to define the terms or attempt the most brief and minute definition. Language comes from the Latin for tongue, lingua. So it's a kind of synecdoche from the start. And the word special, well, we're talking about Latin again, species, but we understand it in the medieval sense as sphere or favoured. Form is from the Latin figure or shape, and communication, again, communicare, to share. So another way of phrasing your question would be, if we used all these old associations, is the tongue dear, or is it just one among many shapes of sharing, which we'd all find a really peculiar question, I think, to be debating. So, there's this big question ambiguity gap with language. And in terms of how we're working language and how other communicators are working, there's this really interesting question, which I hope we'll discuss, about the gap that exists between the experience of the individual and what they convey. And again, this sense, are we understood? do we convey what we want to convey in language? And I don't know if a cetacean creating an amazing sonar picture of what it possibly perceives and conveying that by underwater broadband, I don't know if that cetacean feels like Beckett at the end, that they've sort of failed and they've got to try harder next time. And I can't enter the mind of the cetacean, but in a sense, I can't enter the mind of other humans as well. I'm really interested in cetaceans, interested in the moving story of Nim Chimpsky, the chimpanzee who there was a sort of Turing test experiment whether he could acquire language, and he acquired all sorts of words and was apparently able to ask for a spliff. But again, we don't know if he really wanted a spliff or if he associated that with something else. So finally, I think there's enormous amounts to address. And just really quickly, I'm going to really quickly answer your question. I'm going to say, yes, human language is special to humans, vexing and powerful and wonderful and difficult. And yes, it's just one of many forms of communication. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Ray.
Oh, Hilary, thank you. Well, I want to make 3 points. Firstly, that human language is fundamentally different from any animal communication system. Secondly, that difference is rooted in something even more fundamental. Our status as what I called in a book published many years ago as explicit animals. And thirdly, there is an abundant evidence for the uniqueness of human language and the consciousness in which it is rooted in their countless consequences evident in every aspect of daily life. So let me list some differences between human discourse and anything that bees dance, birds sing, dogs bark, or chimps grunt. Human language has a syntax, parts of speech, sentence structure. This underpins our famous capacity for making infinite use of our finite means, combining and recombining elements. The signs of which human language is composed are arbitrary in a profound sense of being causally and in other respects disconnected from the physical environment and often indeed the situation of the speaker. That's why we can talk of things that are absent or non-existent, enjoy mental time travel, explicitly entertain and indeed deny possibilities in discourse. We also distinguish questions, demands and assertions. And finally, there is a linguistic or meta-linguistic self-consciousness in which we may use language to refer to language, a capacity whose most remarkable, if recent expression, is writing, the encoding, storage and recording of utterances. That's the first point. The second point is that these features of language, rich, complex and profound in themselves, are manifestations of something unique about our humanity, our being creatures who make things explicit to ourselves and to each other. And I hope we're going to talk about things such as pointing and so on. But one aspect of this is what Tomasello and others have called joint, shared or collective intentionality. And intentionality is a property of consciousness in virtue of which it is about something that we share in a community of minds and a common world woven out of 1 trillion cognitive handshakes. And so to my third point, it might be argued that we are privy to the richness of our own language because we experience it from within, whereas we're not privy to the richness of that of animals. How, you might ask, would a dog report on human chatter? Dismiss it as noise, probably. We can, however, be confident of the uniqueness of human language when we contemplate its fruits, the wall-to-wall landscape of artifacts, the built environment, shared expertise, institutions, and other ways of structuring collective activity, laws and rules that are consulted and argued over as well as followed, a common mythical and historical past and future, and also by the rapidity of our cultural evolution and the advance of our scientific understanding of the world. We are, after all, the only bit of nature that puts nature in inverted commas. But to preempt misunderstanding, I'm not saying that as a result of this, we are top animals, only that we are different in a different way. And one of the most profound of those differences lies in our language.
Thank you, Ray. Jennifer.
Human language certainly is special. I don't argue that animals or plants, for that matter, have language as we define it in human terms. We don't have evidence for symbolic communication in other species that's as rich and multifunctional as our language. And as both Ray and Joe have pointed out, human language has a structure and an open-endedness. It's an expressive power that's unlike communication in any other species, as far as we know. But to my mind, there may be a vast unexplored universe in that phrase as far as we know. The field of animal cognition, understanding the minds of other animals, how they think and communicate, is really still in its infancy. And we have a very long way to go before we can say that we fully understand how dolphins communicate, or whales, or elephants, or cephalopods, or even birds. Moreover, even if human language is in its entirety unique, certain aspects of it I don't think are. I'm going to give just one example. One bird species out of 10,000, the New Holland honeyeater of Australia, which is a bird that's toppling old ideas about how much information a bird can convey in its calls. So when a honeyeater spots a threat like a hawk, it makes an alarm call that's packed with information about the nature of the predator and what it's doing. And it really makes you wonder what we're missing in other bird calls and songs. So scientists are finding also language-like qualities, such as this in some bird vocalizations. The key linguistic features such as functional referentiality, the ability to refer to a specific object or event in the environment, and compositional syntax in a very simple form, which is the set of rules for arranging and combining sounds and words to create meaningful phrases and sentences. And there are other parallels between human speech and bird song. We've come to understand that birds learn their songs the way that we learn language, through vocal learning. And the similarities are remarkable, from the process of listening, imitating, and practicing, right down to the brain pathways involved and the actions of specific genes in those pathways. And there are other ways that communication among birds may mirror our own use of language, for instance, in its powerful capacity to deceive and manipulate. And we share these features not because they evolved in a shared common ancestor 300 million years ago, but because of convergent evolution. Birds and humans converged on strategies and similar neuronal pathways and genes because these are good and effective mechanisms for learning sophisticated communication. So in short, birds, to name just one class of animals, may have forms of communication that hold more meaning and subtle language-like qualities than we ever imagined. And the ways that we interpret and categorize them may actually bear little resemblance to how these animals actually hear and use them. So the question that interests me is not so much, are we humans alone in possessing language, but rather, do other animals, and perhaps even plants, have systems of communication that are highly sophisticated with complex characteristics that we don't know how to measure yet? Or we don't have a Rosetta Stone for them, and that are perhaps, at least at the moment, beyond our understanding.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank all of you for such clear positions that you've laid out. So let's begin by looking at language itself before we explore the issue of the relationship with animals, and just try to get clear what we're talking about.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below, or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.